Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again. In this YouTube astrological segment, we'll be talking about astrology and the death of rapper DMX. Now, first of all, I want to offer my condolences and prayers to the family and friends of rapper DMX. If any of them happen to see this, and very tragic, died at the age of 50. Uh, I don't have his time of birth, so I had to improvise once again and do a solar slash sunrise astrology chart. So the thing about it is, the first thing I'm going to talk. Well, I want to let you know first. I'm going to talk about some transits and natal placements that may have contributed to his sad passing. Now, first thing is, he's a sun in Sagittarius, and the moon's either in Leo or Virgo, depending on birth time. If it's based on the solar sunrise chart, it puts the moon in Virgo. I mean, the sun in Sagittarius, of course, is a life that was very, sure, very where he lived with a lot of exuberance and enthusiasm and expansive energy. It's interesting at the time of the passing is that the transit south node had long separated his natal sun. But I'm just wondering if when the south node was actually conjunct his sun, could that have been a harbinger that the life was going to end sometime in the relatively not so distant future after that point. And at this time, based on the solar sunrise time, the chart, the transit south node was in the 12th house in Sagittarius, and South Node in astrology can be about what we're going away from. 12th house can be associated with drugs. That could have been an indicator of trying to really, there should have maybe been more of an effort to get away from that, and being in Sagittarius on a very you could say, on a pretty high level maybe. But another thing I'm looking at in his chart is that he has Jupiter conjunct Neptune. Now, the thing about that aspect is that, as I've talked about in previous videos, I mean, Jupiter can be rather paradoxical. It can be very strongly benign and benevolent, but it could also have a tendency to enlarge and expand. And you have Jupiter conjunct Neptune in a natal chart. Well, I mean, Jupiter's about expansion. Neptune can be about drugs and alcohol. That could expand that energy. In some cases, Jupiter in Scorpio could be very expansive, really relentless energy, obsessive energy. And I'm not saying this to be derisive or derogatory, but just looking at that aspect, that could be an indicator of that. And he also, the thing I noticed in this chart, now he does have in the solar sunrise chart, it puts Leo on the cusp of the 8th house, and he did die really from what started at least as a heart attack. I'm not 100% sure the family did pull him off life support. I believe that's how he ultimately died. But when you have Leo in the 8th house cusp can be death connected with the heart, and being that solar sunrise chart, it put the ruler of the 8th house in the 1st house. The 1st house in astrology can be connected with our early childhood, but I've noticed, like, when other charts I've looked at, like something like the ruler of the 8th and the 1st, or if the sun is conjunct Pluto in the 1st, placements like that seem like where the person can have like an earlier death than the average person. That's just something that I've noticed in my own observations and charts and connected with death. Now, another thing too is that he was, I don't know, they said the reports were that he was in a vegetative state. I don't know if he was officially confirmed brain dead, but he was at least very close to it, I believe. And when that report came out initially, the transit Mercury was very close proximity to his natal Chiron. And Mercury, of course, could be associated with the brain. Chiron can be connected with suffering, with wounds. Interestingly enough, Aries is a sign that's really active. It's about strong activity and action. And Chiron being in conjunction with transit Mercury, well, that could be an indicator of brain inactivity with the brain, I would say, because it certainly Chiron can be about some kind of suffering, and it doesn't exclude stopping perhaps the function of something, which is to one's detriment. Um, this is something to, because remember that Chiron can be connected not just with emotional ones but physical ones as well. And in the solar sunrise chart, he does have Chiron and Aries in the third house. He was going through the Chiron return. He also, the thing about it is the third house is the rational thinking, rational mind. Chiron in the third house can indicate some suffering in connection with that. Also, too, we're looking at this as well, and there's other. I mean, he had a number of transits that were in his fourth house in the solar sunrise chart at the time. The Sun being one of the planets in it, transit Uranus in the fourth house, which can suggest the end of life coming very unexpectedly, very suddenly. Uranus can be very extemporaneous, spontaneous energy. And I mean, looking at this as well, I mean, also at this time, you're talking about transit Mars making a long, let's say by transit orbs, a long opposition to his natal sun. Mars can be about physical physical situation, physical issues. The thing about it is, you have a transit like that, and it's opposing your sun. It certainly is not anything that could be auspicious generally for matters with the physical body. Now, Mars being in Gemini, I don't know if he had any issues with his lungs or with breathing, or anything with the nerves or the hands or the arms or the shoulders, but it wouldn't surprise me if there was something going on with that at the time of his passing. Now, another thing too, what I thought was odd was that at the time of his passing as well, is that he had transit Jupiter, a very close conjunction to his natal north node. Now the thing about it is, again, going back to the fact that Jupiter, though it's very benign and benevolent, maybe in this case it expanded something, issues that he had to confront with the future. That was very unusual, being in Aquarius. Thing too is at this time he also had transit Saturn in his second house, and that could be an indicator of restrictions or limitations in self-worth and self-esteem, and how one may feel about themselves. And there's not a lot more to really look at as far as any transits that might have, in natal placements that might have played a role in his passing. Well, another thing I'm looking at now is that he does have Aries on the cusp of the fourth house of the end of life, and when you have that, the zodiac sign Aries can be connected with the brain, and the fact that you had the malfunctioning of it at the time of his passing, that's an indicator of a death through that. Another thing is when looking at this, the ruler of the fourth house of the end of life, Mars, falls in the 10th house in the solar sunrise chart, and that's an indicator of the end of life that could be gaining some, that garnered some notoriety, exposure, and recognition. And the thing is, I mean, his family obviously was very supportive of him, and I believe that was a family decision. What happened was to pull the plug on his life support at the time of his passing. Again, it's very tragic, very traumatic. You hear something about somebody so young, relatively young, and to pass away, an actor, a rapper, somebody that had really could have had a lot of years that were in front of him, but these things, and again, it's terrible when these things do transpire. He had transit Pluto in the solar sunrise chart in the first house, the physical body as well. At the time of his passing, Pluto can be connected with death. Hold on a moment. This is really, and also too, I'm looking at this now again, is that so in this third house, he had transit Neptune in his third house. And the thing about that is that Neptune could be about dissolving dissipation. This could be about the dissolving dissipation of thinking, of the rational mind, of thinking at this time. And that can mean that could have played some role in him, as far as sadly his death at this time. And I'm looking at this chart as well, and I'm trying to see on here. It looks like Pluto is natal Pluto is at 29 degrees in Virgo, and of course Pluto is associated with death, and it's at the critical degree, 29 degrees of being in Virgo. It's the sign of health. Now I don't know. 29 degrees can be crisis oriented. Now I don't know. I mean, Pluto being in Virgo, I'm not sure if he had any Virgo could be connected with intestinal issues, the, the pancreas. Um, it can be the spleen. I don't know if he had any issues with that at the time of his passing, but it wouldn't surprise me if he may have. So those are some things looking at in his chart, and it's interesting that he does have the Sun square Pluto in his natal chart. Now, the thing about this is, this could be, and I'm not saying he was obsessed with having any kind of power in his life, but it might have been where maybe he felt like he just couldn't quite get enough, no matter what he actually, did, and that's how that aspect can manifest in some cases. So anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment. Until next time, people, Edwin Learnard saying stay well.